are not familiar with the program, it's about 1 year old to the day. Microphone.
Please.
Right. Yes. There you go.
You're being live
Is it on? Yeah, the live stream audience there. Is it on?
No. No.
There we go. Is it on?
No.
Well, she's going to have to tell me because no. Your light is on.
If we can hear you in the room, we should hear you back here.
Is it on? No. Use her. Use. There you go.
Okay.
Whoa. Wow. Okay. So thank you for coming today to our seminar for the Global Change Program, and on this very special occasion where I have the honor of introducing Anne Hitt. A couple of things about Anne. She is amazingly impressive and has accomplished so much, and I'm a big fan of hers. She directs the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign, which has been recognized as one of the most successful environmental campaigns in history. The campaign works to replace coal with clean energy by mobilizing grassroots activists in local communities. She was listed in 2015 as one of the Politico's list of the top thinkers, doers, and visionaries transforming American politics. She has made numerous media appearances on outlets ranging from Good Morning America to NPR, and was featured in the National Geographic film From the Ashes and the Emmy Award-winning Years of Living Dangerously, with co-stars. Okay. She's also co-host of the climate storytelling podcast No Place Like Home, which I also appeared on. We're like sisters. Anne previously served as the executive director of Appalachian Voices, the Ecology Center, and the Southern Appalachian Biodiversity Project. She received her Master's of Science from the University of Montana and her bachelor's degree from the University of Tennessee, where she later received the 2008 Notable UT Woman Award. She grew up in the mountains of East Tennessee and now lives in West Virginia with her family. And I want to welcome her. Let's give her a warm welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
All right, it is a pleasure to be here with all of you. And I'm going to spend maybe 20, 30 minutes here telling you about the work that we have done. Maybe I'll get out of the projector line of sight there. The work that we have done to move the U.S. beyond coal to clean energy. And it has been a people-powered grassroots movement that has transformed how we make electricity in America and continues to transform how we make electricity in America. And at a time when I think the intensity of the climate crisis is really starting to hit people in a new way, when we're seeing a lot of new demand for action, whether it's in the form of the Green New Deal in Washington or the 100% clean energy bills that are being introduced and passed all over the country. And at a time when we have a climate denier in the White House, I think people can feel a lot of sense of urgency and sort of despair about tackling this big crisis. And so the story I want to tell you today is how a humble band of grassroots folks joined together and over the course of about 15 years grew and learned a lot and shared their lessons and helped usher in the clean energy era that we are in the middle of today. And I hope that what you'll take from it is the power of regular people working in the places where they live to make a difference. And so with that, let me just give you a little sense of what brought me to this work. So I, as you heard, grew up in East Tennessee, right outside of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Dolly Parton went to my high school. That's our main claim to fame. And so it's a beautiful place if you've been there. It's all about the mountains and the culture and the music, and that's what our economy is based on. That's why millions of people come visit there every year. And so when I realized that not that far away in other parts of Appalachia, there are entire mountains being blown up, like the one you see here, for this type of mining called mountaintop removal, I was shocked. You know, you're not supposed to throw the trash out of your car window. You're not supposed to, shoot animals if it's not in hunting season and you don't have a license. And so why in the world do people get to blow up the oldest mountains in the world? To me, it was shocking that this was taking place. And so I worked for an organization called Appalachian Voices, where we were trying to stop mountaintop removal. And as we were doing that, there were a bunch of new coal-fired power plants that were proposed. This was during the George W. Bush administration, and there were actually 200 brand new coal-fired power plants on the drawing board in the United States. One of them was in Southwest Virginia, in the mountaintop removal country, but they were in just about every state, coast to coast, and we were trying to stop this one new coal plant in Southwest Virginia because we thought, well, if they build this coal plant, it will be impossible to stop mountaintop removal because there will be a coal plant sitting right there that will be demanding more and more coal. Only to find, again, that we were not the only people that had a new coal plant proposed in our area. There were 200 of them all over the country. And so just like us, there were people who had these coal plants in their backyard who thought, well, we're going to try to stop this. We're going to figure out who's making these decisions. We're going to figure out what influences them. We're going to turn people out to hearings. We're going to write letters to the editor. We're going to use all the tools of democracy. We're going to go to court if we have to. We're going to protest if we have to, try to stop these coal plants. So I got connected in with all of these people from all over the country, many of whom were involved with the Sierra Club, but there were dozens, and then ultimately hundreds of organizations involved. And some of these people were fighting because these coal plants because they were worried about the impacts of mining. Other people were worried about air pollution. Coal plants have historically been our nation's single biggest source of sulfur dioxide pollution, which is linked to heart attacks, asthma, strokes, lots of serious health problems. A lot of people didn't want these new coal plants in their backyard because of water pollution. Coal plants have historically been our single biggest source of mercury pollution, which we get exposed to through the fish that we eat. It goes out of the smokestack, falls into the water, gets into the food chain, and we eat the fish, and then that's how we get exposed. It's especially dangerous for pregnant women because if your baby's exposed to mercury in the womb, they have lifelong, perhaps developmental delays, lower IQs, delays in walking and talking. And coal plants also are the single biggest source of toxic water pollution in the United States, bigger than paper mills and chemical plants and all these other big sources of water pollution. Coal plants are number one. They produce this stuff called coal ash that occasionally has spilled in these big catastrophic spills like the TVA Kingston spill or the Dan River spill in North Carolina. But it also is sort of slow motion tragedies happening all around the country in the places where it's stored at these coal plants. So some people were fighting these new coal plants because of mining impacts, because of air pollution, because of water pollution, and then finally because of climate change. Coal plants for decades were our single biggest number one source of climate pollution in the United States, was coal-fired power plants. So you have all these pollution problems associated with coal, and you also have an alternative. You have wind, you have solar, increasingly you have solar with storage as other ways to make electricity. We don't have to invent something new that doesn't exist. We had an alternative at the ready. So this grassroots network of people got together and over the course of 10 years stopped the construction of over 200 new coal-fired power plants in the United States. And had those been built, we would not be having a climate conversation today because we would have locked this country into another 50 years of our most carbon-intensive form of energy. But they weren't built. And so instead, that grassroots network of people, after stopping all those new proposed coal plants, then looked at the existing, what at that time were 530 coal plants around the United States. And around 2010, we launched this new phase of our campaign to try to retire all the coal plants in the United States by 2030 and replace them with renewable energy. So that's what we're doing now. So since 2010, we have been working state by state, plant by plant, where the decisions are made about how we make our electricity. They are not made in Washington. They are made in states and cities. And so I'm going to show you now a couple of slides to give you a sense of how we've been doing since we launched this phase of our campaign in 2010. So this is going to animate. This is 2010, the amount of coal plants. Let's see if this will work. Okay. These are the coal plants announced to retire in 2011. 2012, 132 plants. 2013, this is going to keep going up until the end of 2018, 181 plants as of 2014. 2015, there were 223 coal plants announced to retire. 2016, it was up to 244. 2017, up to 265. By the end of 2018, it was up to 281. And now you're going to start seeing some of the plants that we think are likely to retire between now and 2020. So here's 2019, here's 2020, up to 379 plants. And as this kind of goes through its little cycle again, this is progress that has been driven by grassroots people living in the places where these coal plants are. So all these gray plants that are showing up are places where there were people living with the air pollution, living with the water pollution, who knew that there was an alternative, who knew that there was a better way to make electricity. And again, these decisions don't get made in Washington. They get made by state regulators, often called utility commissions, sometimes by city councils, sometimes by state legislatures, sometimes even by other agencies or by governors, the policies that the governors pursue. And this is the progress that grassroots advocacy has made. So here we are. Here's another way of looking at this. What you see here, the vertical axis is the capacity of coal plants. What you see, the red line up to the top there, that represents 2/3 of the coal that was online when we started back in 2010. So 2010, there were just over 300,000 megawatts of coal on the grid. We are now, by 2020, aiming to get 2/3 of that announced to retire. That's the red line. You can see on the horizontal axis is time, and the dark blue are the capacity of the plants that have actually retired, that are no longer operating. The light blue are the plants that have announced retirement but haven't yet retired. And then that remaining gray area is the work that we are in the midst of now by 2020. So again, I'm sure you know that there has been a revolution in fracked gas in this country in this period of time. And I think if you read the newspaper, they might say, all this coal is retiring because of market forces, or because of all those changes in the electric sector. But I will tell you that this is not just about markets and market forces. This is about power. This is about very big, powerful companies that have run our electric grid since its inception, and they don't want to give that up without pressure. And the pressure has to happen in the places where the decisions are made, and that's in states and cities. So we do have a lot of changes in the electric sector, and coal is facing competition that it never faced before. But in my experience, all these big changes that we've seen would not be happening without grassroots pressure and grassroots leadership and a lot of tenacity and courage. And so as we're doing this work, there's kind of three themes as to sort of bring us up to the present day that I would underscore of what this work looks like today. The first is we're obviously doing this work now in a Trump era, when we have someone in the White House rolling back all of the federal safeguards that were put in place during the Obama years for coal. So there were, finally, when Obama was president, standards put in place for the first time ever for mercury pollution from coal plants, carbon pollution, coal ash disposal, stronger air pollution standards, stronger water pollution standards, and every single one of those is in the process of being rolled back by the Trump administration. That doesn't mean they will succeed, but this is a picture they had one rally in Chicago for the proposed rollback of the carbon standards for power plants. So that's an 8-year-old Girl Scout who stood up at our rally and gave an amazing speech in support of carbon pollution standards for power plants. But this is an important part of our work as we enter this Trump era, is we have to stand up for our clean air and water and climate standards, and there's a lot of energy around that. But even in the Trump era, we still have big coal plants retiring. We are retiring coal plants just as fast under Trump as we were under Obama. And again, it's because of the local pollution impacts. It's because increasingly renewable energy is cheaper even than coal. So these coal plants used to be the cheapest form of energy on the market. Now they're the most expensive in a lot of places. And because, again, the decisions are made at the state and local level, they're not made in Washington. So the plants you see here on your left, that's the Samus plant in Ohio, and on the right, the Bruce Mansfield plant in Pennsylvania. Those are the two largest coal plants in American history ever to announce retirement. The Bruce Mansfield plant on the right, that blue lake it's a lake of coal ash. You can see it from space. It's highly toxic. Everyone who lives around it has been dealing with the health impacts of having arsenic, lead, mercury in their water for a long time. And so those two plants announced to retire last year, and then the plant in the middle is the Big Brown plant in Texas, which was the single largest source of sulfur dioxide pollution in the United States. And sulfur dioxide pollution is linked to heart attacks, strokes, asthma attacks. And it wasn't just the single coal plant source, it was the single biggest source, period. And it is no longer operating, and all the people in Texas who live downwind from that plant are breathing cleaner air. So again, even in this Trump era, these big notorious super polluting coal plants continue to be announced to retire. Another third theme of this work is economic transition and climate justice. And so this is a picture from northern Indiana, around the Gary area, where there are some big coal plants, and also a lot of folks who are looking for new economic opportunities in renewable energy and all of that promise that it holds. And so we did some trainings and outreach with some kids in the local area around the economic opportunities that come with clean energy. And as someone who lives in West Virginia, I feel very acutely that it's important that we don't leave people behind as we make this transition to clean energy, and also that the clean energy economy, that we make sure that it benefits low-income communities and communities of color that have historically borne the brunt of the worst fossil fuel pollution. And so as we make this transition, it needs to be a just transition, it needs to be centered in equity, and that's something that as the Sierra Club, that both at our policy work and our organizing and advocacy work, that we try to center in everything we do. So those are kind of these themes of this moment that we're in, of resisting these rollbacks, continuing to pressure these super polluters, and working for climate justice with communities. And we are making progress. So these are the health benefits of the coal plants that have announced to retire to date, and this is annual. So every year, over 7,000 fewer premature deaths every year, over $3 billion of healthcare costs saved, almost 125,000 asthma attacks prevented, big reductions in sulfur, nitrogen, and then carbon pollution. And at some point here, we're at 602 million tons of carbon reductions from the plants announced to retire. And some point in the next few years, we will get the first billion tons of carbon reduced, eliminated out of the atmosphere, which I think will be the first time any country in any sector, any sector of the economy in any country has made that big of gains. So it's not just improving public health, but it's moving the needle on climate change at the scale that we have to move it. And as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the National Climate Assessment have made very clear, I'm sure you all have seen we have a decade to start bending the curve down on emissions, and this is a big down payment on bending the curve down on emissions. And I'll talk a little bit more about where this puts us as it aligns with the IPCC recommendations and the Paris Agreement towards the end of my presentation here. So just to drill down into this, something that I think is really kind of a game changer that happened last year. So the top is a utility called NIPSCO, and the bottom is a utility called Excel. NIPSCO is based in Indiana, Excel is based in Colorado. And at the top, these are what it says is, tipping point, new renewables cheaper than existing coal. So NIPSCO is, again, in Indiana, it's conservative, it's very reliant on coal, they have coal mining there. Coal industry is very powerful. The utility there, NIPSCO, did a thorough analysis of their future plans for their utility, ran all sorts of models, and What they landed on for their customers was the most economic option for them was to retire both of their coal plants, which you see at the top, Schaefer and Michigan City, replace them entirely with wind, solar with storage, demand response, and energy efficiency. And by doing that, they will, no new gas, and they will save their customers over $4 billion just compared to running the existing coal plants. And you can see how much solar, wind, and other clean energy they're adding. The bottom is Xcel Energy, the Comanche coal plant, where they decided to retire that plant earlier than they had originally planned to, again, replace it entirely with renewables and efficiency and no new gas and save customers $200 million. And when you have renewable energy, new renewable energy cheaper than just running your existing coal plant, that's a game changer, I believe. And when you have not only this switch from coal to clean energy being a good choice for public health, but increasingly this is how you get the lowest electric bills. And this is the best business decision for utilities. I think there's a certain amount of momentum here that is coming, frankly, just in the nick of time for our climate. And these are both things that just happened last year, so I would argue I feel like it's a tipping point, and I think we're going to continue seeing momentum like that in the electric sector. And I think utilities are starting to realize that if they're on the wrong side of this equation, they might get passed by. So to close out the section on coal here, just a couple of things. One of the biggest retirements announced in the past few weeks was the Navajo Generating Station, which is a big plant on the Navajo Reservation. These are folks, at one point there was a hedge fund in New York that was looking at buying the Navajo Generating Station because, again, they were running out of customers for their electricity because it was more expensive than the alternatives on the market. And the Navajo Generating Station has been a big source of employment on the Navajo Reservation. It's also been a big source of pollution, and it's been divisive. And this effort was led by folks on the Navajo Reservation to call on this one individual with this hedge fund and let him know that they did not want him to buy this struggling coal plant and extend it a lifeline. They wanted to have an economic transition, start investing in renewable energy, and took their message to the streets of Manhattan to make sure that he heard from them personally. And I think I just want to kind of, and I have a little video I'm going to show you of another coal plant that we worked on in Nevada with tribal partners. But again, I think part of the message here as we think about these big issues of climate change and how are we going to tackle this big problem, that ultimately these are also very profoundly important issues to people in local communities who've been calling for change for a long time. And standing with them is an important part of this work. So I just want to show you, switch over to this video, just so you can hopefully get a flavor of that. This is another campaign from Nevada, where again there were the local, both the community, the pollution from this coal plant was really tragically affecting this local tribe, but they also, through this journey, got the chance to be part of the clean energy economy. So I'll show you this now. So hopefully that gives you, hopefully that brings some of the voices into the room of the people who are doing this work. I would also acknowledge Ian over here. Do you want to say hi? Raise your hand. Was an organizer with Beyond Coal here in Georgia for how long?
3 years on staff, and I was a volunteer before that.
So the people on the ground doing the work are what this is all about. And if we have questions about Georgia, then you can help me. You can be my phone a friend if there's anything I can't answer. But that is what this work is all about. It's about people working and rooted in places that are, like as you saw in this video, not only retiring a polluting coal plant that was blowing clouds of coal ash over their community, but then opening up the first tribally owned solar project in the United States, which is now up and running and selling its power to the city of Los Angeles, which is in part buying that power because of pressure from environmental advocates and climate justice advocates in LA who are demanding that LA switch to 100% clean energy. So leadership on the ground and the folks like you just heard in the video are what it's all about. And the last couple of parts of this I want to show you are about how it's not just about retiring coal, but it's about replacing it with clean energy and not gas. And so I'm going to talk about a little bit about both of those, and then we'll have some time for questions. So just a couple things on clean energy. Here's a graph, so I will explain this to you. This is our own assessment of how much clean energy is coming online in the United States, which is it's built from the ground up by our teams on the ground. So the vertical axis is electricity production, horizontal axis is time. You can see where we are, just shy of 2018, and that little tiny, or the smallest little wedge there is 50 terawatt hours of clean energy coming online every year, which is basically where we are now. And that's everything from state standards to utilities that have made commitments to settlement agreements we have with utilities to add clean energy. So it's both required by laws and or things that the utilities are moving forward with. That's how much is coming online. The next, if we keep going at that rate, so if we keep going at this rate, this is where we will be by 2030. If we keep growing at this 50 terawatt hour level. If we double that to 100 terawatt hours a year, you can see that's the next green wedge. And if we quadruple that to 200 terawatt hours per year, that's the top green wedge. So that's what you see here. The black line is what it would take to replace all the coal. The orange line is what it would take to replace all the coal and all the gas. So basically, at the rate we're going now, we'll be at the orange diamond. That's our assessment of if we just keep going at the rate we're going now, roughly. And if we want to replace all the coal, we need to double the rate of clean energy that we're adding. If we want to replace all the coal and the gas, we need to quadruple it. So we put this together for ourselves so we'd have a clear-eyed assessment of the task that is ahead of us. And while we have a ways to go, we're making progress. So this is just some of the ways in which that momentum is building. We have passed 100% clean energy legislation in many states, California, DC. New Jersey is not quite 100, but has a bold target. Connecticut, Maryland just passed a 100% clean energy bill last night. New Mexico passed a 100% clean energy bill earlier this year. We also have utilities that are committing to go 100% carbon-free. Xcel, NIPSCO, as I mentioned, Idaho Power just announced in the last couple of weeks that it is going to 100% carbon-free energy. And then you have cities that are committing to 100%. Boise, Idaho is the latest Missoula. Missoula is just today added to the list, Missoula, Montana, before that Boise, Idaho, but there are over 100 cities that have, and cities obviously don't get to make the decisions always about where they get their energy, but when their elected officials demand 100% clean energy, the utilities pay a lot of attention to that. And Xcel Energy, which has made a 100% carbon-free commitment, is a big utility. It serves 8 states, millions of people. And they said all of the cities in their service territory that had passed these 100% resolutions were one of the main reasons they had decided to pursue this commitment. So there is momentum there. And there is the simultaneous challenge of gas. So I have a couple slides about this. And obviously, the challenges with gas are both the pollution impacts from fracking and gas development and pipelines, and also the climate impacts of not only carbon, but also methane, which is a much more potent greenhouse gas. So the gray circles here show you the existing gas plants in the country. It's about 500 megawatts of gas. And the orange and red are planned gas plants. So that's about another 100 megawatts that is on the drawing board. And at the Sierra Club, we are trying to figure out right now how to stop the gas rush, first and foremost, to try to stop these new gas plants that are being proposed. And I will give you can see they're very concentrated in the Marcellus region of Appalachia where I live, and then down in the Permian Basin in Texas. But I'll just give you one more slide on this of why we're focused on this and what's at stake. So the vertical axis here, again, this is terawatt hours of energy. On the left, you see how much electricity we're getting now from wind and solar. So about 300 terawatt hours now. In the gray, those are our coal retirement goals that we're pursuing. So that's how much energy would need to be replaced from the coal plants that are retiring. And then the blue shows we expect electricity demand to start to go up in part because we want to electrify cars and we want to electrify buildings, and that's going to increase energy demand. So if you look here's the clean energy that we have, here's what we are going to need to replace right here, and we see it as a race between gas and clean energy. And who's going to claim this share of the energy market? Is it going to be gas or is it going to be renewable energy? And if we want to keep our climate anything similar to the climate that we enjoy now, we need to replace it with renewables and not with another fossil fuel. And so as we're thinking of the work in front of us, that is part of how we're trying to characterize that challenge. And we have this network of people who have learned how to affect the decisions about how we make electricity in this country over the past 15 years. They've been working in their utility commissions, they've been working in their legislatures, they've been passing 100% or strong clean energy bills. And it's that network of people, again, with these same decision makers in these same venues that we feel, by really helping to not only finish the job on coal, but really focus on gas, that can actually tackle this problem. So that's the work ahead of us, and I just have one more little success story for you, and then two last slides about the sort of big climate implications of all this work. So this is Los Angeles. This is just maybe a month ago, and in Los Angeles, we had started way back with Mayor Villaraigosa. He was the first mayor to come out and say he was going to move his city beyond coal. He made that. Al Gore was there, and all the climate luminaries were there for that announcement. It was probably 8 years ago or something. And that then was the moment when we started thinking about all the gas in LA. And in particular, the gas that was in the city that we knew was going to kind of hit its expiration date. And LA was going down the path of investing $2 billion in refurbishing and rebuilding 3 big gas plants. And a very diverse and tenacious coalition of folks worked on this for about 6 years to push LA to not repower these gas plants and instead invest all that money in clean energy. And about a month ago, they won. And Mayor Garcetti announced that he would not be investing that $2 billion in these gas plants and is going to instead invest all of that $2 billion in solar, community solar, rooftop solar, solar with storage, energy efficiency, improving transmission, and all sorts of other renewable energy solutions to meet LA's energy needs. And he said when he made this announcement that this was the beginning of the end for gas in LA and California. And so this is a new chapter and a new cutting edge piece of our work. And while we are the Beyond Coal campaign, increasingly we're really more of the Beyond Fossil Fuel campaign. And I think it's important to tie this together, both because of the urgency of the climate crisis and because the work is very interconnected, because it's all happening, all these decisions are happening in the same places. So 2 last slides on the climate implications of all this. This is Paris. So this vertical axis is greenhouse gas emissions in the United States as measured by the EPA, who is the entity that tells us if we're on track to meet our Paris goal or not. The blue line are actual emissions that have been coming down. Which unfortunately went up a little bit last year because of gas, which is part of why everyone's doubling down. The orange line shows what we need to do to hit our Paris Agreement, and the horizontal line there shows if we don't change anything, we'll be at that flat point. The orange dotted line is where we need to go to meet our Paris Agreement. The work that I have just been describing to you for the past half hour on coal and gas and clean energy, if we achieve the goals we are setting out for 2020, it will get us almost halfway towards closing the gap toward our Paris goals. So again, when I say it's moving the needle on the scale that matters for climate change, this is what I mean. And of course, even meeting the Paris Agreement is not enough to avert a climate crisis, and I think we know that, but it's an important benchmark, and we can get a good part of the way there with grassroots leadership in the states through work that we feel very confident that we will be able to do, although it's hard. I'm not going to pretend it's easy. So that's one way to put this in perspective. And then the last slide I have for you is around the IPCC. And so this was the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in their last report. One of their calls to action, maybe that's not a word they would use, maybe one of the imperatives that they put forward in the report was we have to get the world off of coal. We have to get the developed countries of the world off coal by 2030, and we have to get the developing countries of the world off of coal soon thereafter. And so the vertical axis here is, again, how much coal we've had in the United States since 2010 when we started measuring it. The blue going down, that's how much we've reduced it so far. The black line, the biggest year we ever had was 2015 for coal retirements. And if we kept retiring coal at the same rate as we did in 2015, we would have no more coal in the country by 2030. If we do it at the same rate as we did over the past 3 years, we would be at about 80% of our coal retired by 2030. And this is beyond the last slide I showed you for Paris. That's just the goals our 2020 goals we have. That would be if our campaign closed up shop at the end of 2020 and went home, we would close half the gap to the Paris Agreement. But if we keep going past that, this is what's possible just with coal. And I think when people see these big climate reports from places like the IPCC and they think, well, Trump is the president and he's a climate denier and the fossil fuel industry is so powerful, there's no hope. And I want you to take away the message that there is hope. And it's happening in states, and it's happening in cities, and it's happening on the scale that matters. And yes, we need to double down, and we need to do more. But people in this country are meeting this call to action, even if our president is not, and we are going to keep going, and we are not going to stop. And that includes right here in Georgia, where actually we have had some big coal retirement announcements just in the past couple of months. And there's big new clean energy coming online, and you don't have to go to California to do this work. You don't have to live on the West Coast to do this work. It's happening right here, and it's happening everywhere. So that will be my closing photo to you, is just some of the great people around the country, Illinois, Minnesota, all over, doing this work, the Pacific Northwest, and to say this is happening everywhere. It's happening here, and we would love for you to be part of it. So thank you.
We have some time for questions. Very thought-provoking, beautiful talk. I love the message of hope, of course. Yeah, over there.
You talk a lot about clean energy, and you talk a lot about solar and wind, but I hear nothing about nuclear power. Do you want to speak on that at all?
I would be happy to. The Sierra Club's position on nuclear power is we are opposed to nuclear power. We are the only democratically run national environmental organization, meaning our board of directors is elected by our members. And so if you're a member of the Sierra Club, you get to vote for our board. And the board sets our energy policy, and it's a board made of grassroots leaders. And so we have had a long-standing position of opposition to nuclear power. I also know, as the director of the Beyond Coal campaign, that if we suddenly retired all of our nuclear power plants tomorrow, they would probably be replaced by fossil fuels, which would not be a good thing. And so I think we're in a tricky time, personally, I think, where we would not want to expand nuclear power in this country. And as we are replacing it, And as it's retiring and becoming more expensive, or not becoming more, it is incredibly expensive. That's why it's retiring, because it's having trouble competing with other forms of energy. That we have to be thoughtful about that so that we aren't getting ourselves into a position where it's getting replaced with a bunch of fracked gas. And so that's the challenge that we're in as a country right now. It's just my view. So. But I know I'm in an engineering school, so probably lots of people are big fans of nuclear power here. So we can, I'll just put my cards on the table.
Always smart, yeah.
You mentioned early on consideration for the people involved in the coal industry and somehow soft landing for them. I'm asking this question in total ignorance, but is there anybody that's doing any research on what can be done with coal aside from burning it for power? Is there anything that can use that incredibly large resource for something useful, productive, but not pollutant that could be done?
You know, there are some people doing, I'm not an expert on that. There are also, you know, the other main use of coal in the country is for making steel, but that also just creates a huge amount of emissions. So maybe someone in here, this is an engineering school, maybe someone is doing that research, could answer the question. But I think that from my vantage point as a West Virginian, I think that we need a couple of things. We need some federal resources for economic diversification. And, you know, the way I see it, everyone in this country owes a debt to the people of Appalachia who sacrificed their clean air and their clean water and their health and their lives to give us cheap electricity for 100 years. And reinvesting in those places is morally the right thing to do, but I also think that for our sort of political and economic future, it's also the right thing to do. And there are a lot of economic opportunities in clean energy that so far aren't coming back to those places that I think could. So I think there's a lot more that we could be doing right now. There's a bill in Congress called the Reclaim Act that I think is being introduced maybe tomorrow, reintroduced, that would free up $1 billion from the Abandoned Mine Lands Fund, which is just sitting there. But Congress has to authorize it to be released, and it would go towards those very efforts. So there's something on the table now that we could do that would make a big difference, but we need Congress to release the funds, and so far they haven't done that.
So I'm from Arkansas, and you're from Tennessee, and you're sort of familiar with the political climate of those areas and the way that climate change has been sort of amped up. And I'm wondering how you speak specifically to local and state leaders about climate change, especially I think we have an issue in Arkansas where those damages aren't as visible to people living in Arkansas. They just see them through the news. And I'm wondering how you talk to people about that.
Well, one of the things about coal and gas is that people are affected by the pollution even if they don't believe in climate change. I don't know if you can believe in something that is a fact, but that, you know, so people, you know, in Tennessee who experienced the TVA coal ash spill or just heard about it on the news, people who, you know, saw the trees in the Smoky Mountains dying from acid rain back in the 80s and still remember that was from the TVA coal plants. So I think that there are a lot of ways that people understand that this is not good for our health, it's not good for our communities, and there's no, those are easy things to talk about, and you're right that climate is harder. And I think, you know, I believe that as people start to see the impacts, I mean, Gatlinburg, where I grew up, had these wildfires rip through in the middle of the winter a couple of years ago that a lot of people lost their lives and a lot of the tourism businesses were destroyed. And I do think that got people's attention at some level, that why in the world do we have a wildfire coming through in the middle of winter in what is essentially a temperate rainforest where this has never happened before. And I think there are some people that are being fed so much misinformation that they will never see the reality of climate change. The one thing I think maybe for those folks that may or may not eventually get their attention is their kids. You know, we have all these, like my daughter is 8 and she just participated in the climate strike and that they did in schools where thousands of kids walked out of school, and I wasn't even in town that day, so I didn't put her up to it. She was worried about her future, and she was worried about what's going to happen to the world. And I don't know if kids talking to them will eventually be the thing that maybe changes some minds, but that would be what I would put my money on probably.
Okay.
I'm a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But if you just address, I believe a carbon tax would enhance your abilities to do things. And you know, we've got the bill in front of Congress now with the carbon tax and then dividend.
Yep, and I'm sure folks are familiar with the concept of if you put a price on carbon one way or another, then that would incentivize people to not use so much of it. And it is certainly one of those climate solutions out there at the federal level that I think is getting a new lease on life now that climate is kind of back on the front burner. So definitely, and I know Citizens Climate Lobby is an amazing operation of volunteers, and I think just every congressional district in the country. So thank you for everything you're doing.
So are there effective programs for all these mines that have been retired and all the people who are working there for generations, usually undereducated and lack development and support in so many ways?
I think it depends on the area. You know, I will say honestly, to me as a West Virginian, I am frustrated that we haven't had a more honest conversation about the fact that coal isn't coming back. I mean, if you think about the slides that I showed you, we were getting half of our electricity from coal in this country 10 years ago. Now it's below 25%. We're not building any new coal plants. 287 coal plants announced to retire, and more coming every month. And I think we need to have an honest conversation, and we need resources to support folks. And when we don't have either of those things, people, frankly, their fear is being whipped up. I will say I share an office with a little company called Solar Hauler that is training people from the coal fields to be solar installers, putting together the solar projects for them in West Virginia, keeping the money in West Virginia, building a business in West Virginia. They're an amazing company. And I think that there are a lot of incredible efforts across Appalachia, like that Coalfield Development Corporation is another amazing company that's doing great work. But when your political leaders won't acknowledge that you have a problem and you need to change, and you don't really have the policies as a result of that would help you, and you don't have the resources that would help you get going, you're trying to do something that's already very hard, and it's just much, much harder because you don't have the political and the sort of financial winds at your back. And that's where I feel like we're, if we could fix both of those, I think we could actually make a lot of progress. But you're right, it's hard. It's hard, and I don't want to sugarcoat that at all, that in the coal mining parts of the country, it's a hard transition, and it's being made harder by the lack of leadership and support.
A comment first, which is you may be interested to know that about 100 yards behind you, there used to be a nuclear plant until about 25 years ago. It was for teaching, not for anything. But my question is, the argument gets a whole lot easier about getting rid of coal because the economics are in your favor. How do you make the argument against gas?
Well, when we started working on coal, the economics were not in our favor. And so that was something that we intentionally have worked on that's been an intentional focus of our campaign. The only reason that coal was the cheapest form of electricity on the market when we started was because all of their pollution was being dumped on people for free, whether it was carbon, coal ash, mercury, many of the major pollutants coming from coal, there were no federal regulations for them whatsoever. And when it comes to gas, I think similarly there are a couple of vulnerabilities. One is renewable energy is now cheaper than gas in some places, especially out west, where renewable energy has really gotten a big head of steam. And so we have had, including Arizona, California, a few other states where new gas plants have been pulled back because there's actually renewable, or the NIPSCO and Xcel examples I gave you, where they're replacing coal with renewables instead of gas because the renewables are actually the cheapest. So I think that that's one vulnerability, and I think the other is that, again, they're part of why they're cheap is because they're dumping their pollution on people for free from the fracking waste and the flaring of the methane. And if they actually had to produce it in a responsible way and pay for to clean up their pollution, that they might kind of lose some of that advantage. So I think that's part of the part of the work in front of us as advocates is to connect all those dots for folks and make not just make that argument to the public, but make it to the regulators and the utilities as well.
A couple more questions, yes.
Can you speak to the specific political strategies that you have for lobbying politicians in southern states like Georgia?
Ian, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So in Georgia, we have an elected body that regulates our utilities. We have a monopoly utility that generates all of our power, Georgia Power, and then they sell it to the co-ops around the state as well. And so that body of elected officials, they represent you, and they're elected statewide. You just voted for 2 of them in November. And a very interesting benefit that they have politically is that no one knows who they are or what they do. They're public service commissioners that serve the public. But you have actually a lot of access to those commissioners, and they all represent you because they represent specific districts, but they're elected statewide. So you can go talk to any of them anytime. And they usually don't have people calling them or writing into them. So we have more activist commissioners that like to be in many different places and talk to a lot of different people, and there are others that never leave their office in downtown. But right now, actually, Georgia Power has filed its 20-year energy plan, and that triggers this public process that's going on. There's actually a hearing this Monday about what's in the plan, and advocates like Sierra Club and our partners around the state and our activists that we work with go down there and make public comments, and in between those processes you can contact them at any time. But I would say just like generally about how to approach skeptics or climate deniers or climate delayers. Really in Georgia, we do have the economics on our side. We don't have quite the same cultural identity around coal that other states have. And we spend $30 billion sending money out of state to import our fossil fuels. So that's coal, oil, natural gas, and oil is the lion's share of that. But it's still several billions of dollars for the electricity that we burn, the fuel that we burn for electricity. So when you hit them with that, it's a really powerful argument. And then I spent a lot of my time talking to local officials, so county commissioners, chambers of commerce, in places where we have coal plants, and then also places where solar energy has a lot of potential. And again, those are really accessible to people who really just want to see their community benefit. And when you bring in this conversation about the trajectory of where coal is going, it's really hard to make the argument that it's going to continue providing that benefit. And you really have to acknowledge, like you said, the contributions that these communities have made to powering our country. And so I feel like when you start from that place, you can get to having the conversation about what's next, or just acknowledge the pain or awkwardness of what a transition is going to look like. So I'm happy to talk after to anyone, but basically I tried to speak in as realistic of terms as possible and acknowledge where we are coming from as a Sierra Club, as environmental advocates, and show that there was a lot of common ground, more common ground than there was divisiveness, that most people in these communities, all people in communities want clean water, clean air, and that good jobs are important. And fortunately, Georgia Power was eliminating coal jobs themselves, so I didn't have to talk about, that I was the big bad monster, coming into town and eliminating jobs. Local leaders could see that transition was already happening. So we really changed the cultural conversation in a lot of ways, and policy is really important, but that cultural change is just as important as policies.
Awesome, thank you. You see, he left our team to go back to school, and you can see why I'm very sad about that, but
Anyway, let's thank Mary Ann.
And thanks, Ian has given you a couple of concrete opportunities to get involved if you want. So thank you for flagging the hearing and the process, and if you're interested, come and talk with us.
Thanks, everybody.